Here we go. Okay, so if you want to introduce yourselves in a quick minute and say what perhaps your relationship to Foresight is and what a really, really good outcome would be. Just one,
good outcome.
like one sentence utopia. You go.
I'm Aubrey I'm the Chief Scientist of SENS Research Foundation, among other things. I have been part of this community for quite a long time now, and in fact, I spoke at a Vision Weekend 15 years ago, which was a fairly important part of the sequence of events that led me to become a high-profile person and speak at TED and things like that a couple of years later. My utopia is a world in which nobody gets sick, and that's it.
Nice one. Okay, that was much briefer than I expected. Thanks, Aubrey. All right, cool. Steve.
So my name's Steve Boyer, and I'm actually a synthetic organic chemist, officially trained as a chemist. I've worked as a medicinal chemist for a while for a pharmaceutical company, and then at IBM Research for over 30 years. And I'm currently now consulting for Google. And I'm very interested in opening up the scientific data to the public and making it more transparent, and how that data could then be further exploited for machine learning and other artificial intelligence analysis, shall we say. So I'm very interested in working towards that end, to advancing science.
Awesome. Thanks. Okay, Joe.
Hi, I'm Joe Betts-Lacroix, and I'm sort of a hybrid. Done a bunch of academia, like Harvard, MIT, Caltech, then decided to get into private industry, and so I'm an entrepreneur now, and I run companies and help discover drugs to cure diseases, because nobody wants to get sick. And I think an ideal outcome for me, so I run a company called Vium. An ideal outcome would be that if we see all the people on the sides of this room here who outnumber the people who are actually in the room, I believe, and none of them, I would guess, or almost none of them actually chose to die, but these are all people who are no longer with us. And in their brains are these vast stores of beautiful information that we no longer have access to. It's unfortunately not archived yet. I'm sure Brewster will fix that for us. Okay, I'm willing to help. So
It's a commitment.
So,
put it in the spreadsheet, guys.
A wonderful utopian outcome from my perspective would be that only the people who choose to die have to die.
Okay, so yesterday we generated a bunch of strategies. Okay, and today we're going to follow up on them. So we have a few note takers. Like, those are the slides of the note takers. So if you want them as a mental bridge, feel free to use them. If you have them still clearly in your head, then that's also good for a role. So Aubrey, maybe in like 3 minutes only, what was the strategy that your group came up with yesterday to really make progress on those goals in the next 30 years?
Well, so what we mainly talked about, as you can see in the notes up here, was not actually so much strategies to hasten the goals, but rather strategies to ensure that the goals are transitioned into, that they are implemented and distributed as smoothly as possible once it becomes possible to do so. Now, of course, it's kind of not quite correct to treat those two things as independent, because both of them require a much greater and deeper and more widespread degree of appreciation and anticipation of the events that are eventually going to occur. The more we, as a society, understand that the defeat of aging is something that is within striking distance, something that is no longer just a dream, the more popular the idea will be that we should do it sooner rather than later. And I think that, therefore, we need to get that enthusiasm out there as quickly as possible. Of course, that's why people like myself go out and don't just do science, we also do a huge amount of outreach. But beyond that, I feel certainly as a result of discussions and thinking that I've done over many, many years, which was broadly reinforced yesterday, that there's a very big risk that once these therapies arrive, there won't have been enough forward planning, there won't have been enough anticipation to allow them to be distributed and disseminated with the rapidity that could have occurred otherwise. And as such, of course, this means that a large number of lives will be unnecessarily lost at that point, and a large amount of suffering will unnecessarily occur. So this is all kind of not good. As such, there are these kind of shared, these joint goals, these joint reasons for wanting to get people in the wider world to understand the value of all of this, to hasten the development of the technologies, and also to ensure that the appropriate investment and preparation is done to get those things out to everybody as soon as possible after they're available to anybody. One thing that we definitely talked about was whether this could actually not only be an unnecessarily slow process, but also an unnecessarily divisive process, where the desperation to gain access to these therapies once they have come into existence leads to civil unrest or, more than that, serious violence, which of course would be a positively retrograde step rather than just a lack of a forward step. I think there's still a good deal of spectrum of opinion with regard to whether that's a serious risk, but even if it isn't, the risk of not having a sufficiently rapid forward step is a very big one. So I think we will certainly be able to do much better if we can get opinion formers on board. I always mention Oprah Winfrey just because she's been an opinion former since before I was born, so it feels. But there are obviously such people around the world, and we don't need very many of them because they influence large numbers of other people. This will, of course, accelerate the progress of the research simply by bringing more money into it, but that's a problem that I believe is mostly solved at this point with especially over the past year or two, the explosion of the private sector interest in bona fide rejuvenation technology, which was very slow in coming. So the money is kind of not the biggest thing. It's kind of a broadly solved problem. But getting people out there to advocate for this in a manner that is sufficiently powerful and sufficiently effective that it actually ends up influencing public policy, that's a whole new deal, because that is what is going to be required in order to justify the very much greater amounts of expenditure that will be needed in order to train enough medical personnel. We're going to need a lot of medical personnel.
Don't you think, I think, there's a thing to be said for just making a list of arguments of objection against longevity, and then the best rebuttals, and I did that, but and it's on existentialhope.com if anyone wants to check it out or use it, in case they have those difficult discussions. But one thing that really, really never lets me go is this psychological cost that people have by they are still in the death's trap. So there's this really psychological cost of really opting in and realizing, okay, potentially we can do this thing, but potentially it may also be beyond my lifespan. So they have this really this potential loss there, and it's really risky to opt into this thing, because if they opt in, they're out of this death's trap. So now they don't anymore see death as a given. So now they acknowledge really psychologically that it's something that we want to overcome, or at least extend their lifespan. But then you also have to give them a safe space of where they can opt into. So it almost seems like a chicken and egg problem. Until the science isn't there that we can show them that it's really, really in our lifetime feasible, you can't really make them opt in. What do we do there?
I agree totally. I've called it the pro-aging trance. I think it's ultimately the case across any area of life that psychologically, if there is some horrible thing in your future that you have made your peace with, then irrespective of how you made your peace with it, how irrational your rationalizations actually were, reversing out of that and becoming engaged again emotionally is an incredibly difficult thing, something that people will resist tooth and nail. I have not found a way out of it yet.
But could you maybe do a modeling of where you said if we put so many resources into this one thing, then we have kind of a reasonable, we could reasonably predict that we could make that much progress in so long. So then it's almost if enough people opt into this thing, then a Kickstarter for this.
Yeah, it kind of, I haven't found a way to do it. I haven't kind of come up with a way of doing that really, has power. The difficulty is, of course, that any predictions about the time frame for the arrival of future technologies are always necessarily very speculative, and that much more speculative when the technologies are very ambitious. And this particular technology, we have the additional problem that people have been claiming that they've already done this or that they're about to do it since the beginning of civilization, and they've always been wrong. So there is an added, motivation for skepticism and hesitation on the part of the general public. It's very, very hard to get around that. I really haven't solved it.
Okay, before we tackle think about this on the panel right now. Things that this community could do, like outsource some of your action plans. But before that, your 30-year strategy. Should I bring up the notes?
In terms of longevity and utopia, and I think what we could do is have a better understanding of what I call the molecular self. In terms of having a better understanding of the biology of the human species, we know very little about all the human metabolites, about how molecular memory works, and how the chemistry underneath that biology and the physics underneath that chemistry. And so I think the biggest thing we could do is focus on education. And to that extent, it's very important that we have interdisciplinary collaborations. So I know what I can do to do my part. And I'm trying very hard to do I call it computer curation of the scientific literature. And, most of the scientific accomplishments are published in these papers, and there's thousands and thousands of papers, and scientists can't read them every day. They can't keep up with the patents, they can't keep up with the journal articles. So what has evolved is we're using computers to read the papers for us, and we're extracting the data out of the scientific literature and making it more available to the scientists to work with. And to do that, I can't do that because I don't have the computer skills. So I need to work with computer scientists. And I need to do not just chemistry papers, but biology, physics, and so forth. So I think we have to have better access to that information, and we have to have better computer curation tools. And we have to make an environment where everybody could get to that data and then exploit it with all the new machine learning and AI tools that are becoming available. So I think we need to focus on communication. Most of the people aren't aware of a lot of the accomplishments that are happening. They're not aware of the databases that are out there. I find that we need to up the bar in terms of transparency with our scientific accomplishments. I said, people are probably more aware of NFL players or NIH, than they are of NIH scientists. And so it'd be nice if we have say a public relations campaign to focus on funding. Maybe education should be funded in part by the defense budget, because as we go further, there was a comment in there that maybe generals should be scientists. But as we get into cybersecurity and bio warfare possibilities and things like that, it's good to have a better focus on science. And so I think what Brewster's doing with the Internet Archive and what we've been trying to do, not that many people are aware that the work I've done in 10 years in curating the patent literature, IBM was kind enough to donate all of that to NIH. Every molecule that was occurred in any patent up to and through 2015, it's all been donated to NIH. You have to have access to this data, and we have to have better transparency.
Transparency and education.
Yeah, and education.
Okay.
And I think it says philosophy will be a game changer there, but actually it was quantum computing down the road could be, and that will also impact how what I call critical thinking, which essentially is philosophy.
Okay, so I think biology's, so I'm obsessed with biology. I'm made of it, you're made of it. We don't like it when it breaks. I think that a lot of us in this community kind of make a personal bet of what we want to work on. Am I an AI person or a nano person or a bio person, that kind of thing. And at some point, probably AI or nano will just rise up and make all the bio stuff sort of laughable and kind of irrelevant. That's my view. But in the meantime, that's all just fictitious stuff to me, and biology is here, and so I'm practical, so I just want to work on that for the time being. Biology's been going really fast. We sequenced the human genome in 2001-ish timeframe, and that was the solution. Once we know that, then that's the blueprint of life, and everything else will be downhill from there. And then, wow, it got more complicated, and there's all this epigenetics, and so now we can sequence the epigenetics, and that's cool. Oh, now, damn, it looks like every cell in the body, or like there's thousands of different cell types in the body, and there's different things going on in every one, and tissue is really complicated. It's not just the cells, it's the intracellular matrix, and but now we have single cell sequencing, and that's going really well. So I think biology and these advances are coming faster and faster, like everything else. So that's great. Let's keep biology going. So one of my horror scenarios is that all of this incredible progress in biology gets shut down. Like, for instance, by like mindless reactionary anti-biology regulation from a conservative government.
How can we prevent it?
So I think the way we prevent it is by proactively, right now, promoting reasonable, thoughtful, moderate regulation of biotechnologies, so that some of the things that could stimulate a bad shutdown scenario, like a killer terrorist virus or something like that, don't happen. And then I think that, ironically, creating some regulation now, which sounds horrible, could actually safeguard and allow future rapid biology progress. And what we could actually do now for that is get involved in understanding the different philosophical and practical aspects of what it takes to regulate biology and specifically synthetic biology.
All right, Joon, any synthesis here?
Sure. I'm
also a few words on who you are.
Yeah. I'm Joon. I'm a medical doctor, and I help support this field through the incentive prize mechanism, and I also have just an intrinsic interest in the field. Dates back a long time, and I've known two of these guys, Joe and Aubrey, for a long time. Steve, I met yesterday. I'm a fan of the movement, the people involved, all the initiatives. I'm impressed with the growth through Foresight, and I think a lot of other great organizations have taken on. My primary focus right now is on the prizes, and specifically, I'm involved at the National Academy level. I'm going to come back to that in a second. I really appreciate the focus on large-scale issues, both on the communication, on philosophical framing, setting a roadmap, leadership. I mean, Aubrey's been at this longer than almost anybody I know. Focus on policy. I think all these things are important, and it speaks to the fact that we need a lot more people that are advocates out there from all dimensions, including all of you. The more you share your perspectives, your digested version of where we ought to go, the faster this field is going to grow. So you guys are, I think, our best hope. And then, there are a lot of things going on top down that I think you can both be aware of and maybe even be a part of. The National Academy in March is going to announce a large basket of prizes that are being funded. We provided the seed funding, a couple $1 million, but it's been matched by a number of people. There's been corporate donations, no strings attached. Johnson & Johnson gave $9 million. And there's about $25 million coming from the Ministries of Health from 7 different countries, all around longevity prizes. So I can publicly say this because it actually was mentioned publicly by Victor Zhao. And that's all coming in March. So that funding is coming. And it also makes it a global exposure. I think the idea here is to reduce the search cost. It's when you have an information revolution like this is much bigger than the Gutenberg revolution, right? In a way, communication is hard because people have access to so much information. How do you manage that, curate that information, shine the light on various things, and have the crowd do a lot of the work? Realistically, probably the right answer on aging is going to come from a new place or some diverted place of what's going on. And the internet has this way of, you can crowdsource all these things, the people, the ideas, and the funding. So I think use of that as a lever is one of the things that can really pull these things forward. I think all of us believe that this is a matter of when, not if, and therefore, how do we accelerate the timeline? And the crisis is massive. I think Aubrey mentioned this yesterday. It is really stunning that we sit around thinking this is okay, right? I mean, we have this tendency, we hoard the morality for ourselves that we're good people, and when we eat meat, we don't think about the fact that we've outsourced the killings elsewhere. When we think about aging, one of the reasons why we're blind to it is because we outsource aging elsewhere. People age out in nursing homes and hospitals and ICUs. We see them on the physician side, and if you actually saw, yes, it's dignified, but not really. It's awful. The suffering is social, biological, neural, mental. You lose all your friends. I think it's the worst thing going, and it's 500,000 people per week that we're losing from aging-related diseases. So this is it's a historic crisis per week. I want to close with what, from a synthesis perspective, what's my particular interest in search costs? I have no justification for this, but I'm hoping that there are genes that regulate homeostatic capacity, regulate antagonistic pleiotropy. I don't know, but if those are the upstream switches you could modify, it might have an effect on, given the fact that we know that aging has plasticity, could we extend that on the sooner end of things? George Church now, he's migrating over to our field as well. He's looking at 9 genes. These are all good things. People are coming into our field, and hopefully somebody will find something.
Neat. Okay, now is the time for you to ask this community a one sentence. What would you like this community to do next year to make progress on this? Aubrey, you go.
Well, if it's got to be just one thing, then it's the Oprah Winfrey thing. I think that we have to recognize how people get to be Oprah Winfrey. They do it by being very smart and very perceptive and very careful only to get in front of public opinion when they already know that public opinion is going to move in that direction. In other words, they actually, they're not so much thought leaders as they may appear. They are just very good and very careful about knowing whom to trust to get the information that leads them to decide to say publicly what they decide to say publicly. So we need to be getting to people like that, the foremost opinion formers of civilization today, and getting them to see that it is in their interests, in terms of their careers, to actually start getting ahead of public opinion for us, and actually saying it's time to promote and hasten the development of these pioneering technologies.
All right, so who's committing here to tracking down a few of those people? Here, we have a name. Okay, write it down in your commitment section. And feel free to jump on. Okay, next one here, Steve. What's your 1 minute ask for this community? How can they help you in the next year? What do you want from them?
Well, being realistic, I think one of the things I've gotten out of this was networking. I mean, we talked earlier about shared consciousness and where things might go in the future, but in a way, I met people here knowledgeable of blockchain. I've met some biologists, some doctors, some computer scientists, and I think this kind of networking is very useful. And I think educating each other a little bit on your own discipline and sharing that knowledge with somebody from another discipline, and that's something you can do every day. And we should just go home and try to take the knowledge that you have from your discipline and see how it could leverage the knowledge from somebody else, for example.
All right. Can we all commit to do that?
That'd be useful.
I think so, right? Okay, Joe.
Okay, well, one would just be learning about biology, to read up on. There are lots of resources, so for the side where I think finding proxies for the ways that the body, specifically the way it ages, having proxies like that can get validated and be used by companies who are developing therapies would help accelerate the rate of.
How can they do that?
Of work. I think you could study existing proxies. Like yesterday I was using the examples of blood pressure and cholesterol. There are a bunch of proxies that people are looking at right now in the aging field. For instance, epigenetic combinations, different cytokines, et cetera. I saw the 1 minute. For you. I think there are more of those, but finding the ones that would have the highest predictive power and could be commercially best implemented would be useful work. And also getting involved in synthetic biology regulation and understanding the subtleties of that and contributing to that field would also be great. So it's basically learning about stuff in a deep way and getting involved in the conversation.
Can you recommend resources?
I think you could start with SynBioBeta for regulatory stuff, branch out from their website on aging biomarkers. It's a tough space. It's very broad. You could go to SENS Foundation. There's a lot of information there. You could read about what biomarkers are.
Yeah, Joon. Want to ask for this community?
Sure. So number one, have hope. And then there are two places, if you're interested, I can direct your attention to that's coming up. So we're launching a $1 million competition on solving the principal agent problem, essentially solving the problem of incentives of all institutions. So one of the things that's holding every dimension of this back, including policy and science and publishing and media, is the deep corruption of the principal agent problem. So if you look at, what happens in Washington, right? I mean, ever since George Washington, we've been trying to solve the political economy problem, the political bosses and the special interests and campaign finance. We're probably right around 1890 right now in terms of the progressive movement. We're probably going to have a 30-year runway. And I think that was the time to change everything. People wanted to change the status quo. So you can be an activist. You can be the muckrakers of today. You can be the progressives. Go make the change you want to see. And, I think solving the principal agent problem is huge. So you can look for that. And then we also launched something called the Copernicus Prize, which is it's going to run through. So the Principal Agent Problem Prize is going to run through the largest science journal in the world. So that announcement will be happening soon. We're just in documents right now. So they're going to launch it, and you can look for it. It's available to everybody. And the Copernicus Prize is going to launch through one of the top universities, top 3 or number 1, depending on who you ask. And that's going to get people to, and especially young people, to rethink everything they've been taught and look at the minority position to see if that's the correct view, just so that we get just more ideas in the mix than the status quo. So you can look for those things. And I think those are all things that you guys can participate in as well.
All right, thanks. One last question, at least to take one from those notes, and also because it's a personal interest of mine, and this is just a one-sentence answer. Have you considered cryonics?
Well, fuck. I mean, of course I have. I mean, obviously it's well known that I've been on the scientific advisory board of Alto since 2002. I've been a member since then as well. But yeah, I mean, for anyone who feels that it has been a good use of their time to spend their weekend at this meeting, it's completely crazy not to be involved in cryonics. Whatever your level of optimism is as to the likelihood of resuscitation by particular means based on the quality of cryopreservation that we can do today, it still is imperative to support the cryonics movement, whether by being a member, donating to the organizations or whatever, in order simply to advance the technology fast enough to save more lives in the future.
All right. Anyone else? Cryonics?
I've definitely considered it. I don't have super high confidence of the information that I care about being preserved right now yet. If I did, I'd also consider it a little bit like, I'm a little bit afraid of being lulled into a false sense of security that everything's fine as long as I'm going to be frozen. So I kind of like the sort of naked exposure to existential extinction as a motivator.
Great motivator, but also a risky bet. Okay, yes, no?
I don't want to freeze an aging body, if that's what the question was.
Yes.
I rather work towards better understanding of molecular memory and basically take my experiences and back them up and then maybe take that in a molecular way and pass it on genetically or something.
All right, Joon?
I don't think it's unreasonable, but I haven't thought about it for myself.
All right. So just to close this off, what I discussed with a few people was maybe doing a workshop in the next year where you model out what a future state in which people live much, much longer and perhaps have reached escape velocity would actually look like. So doing like societal modeling on that. Do you think this would be a good action plan?
Sure. I mean, you know, if this weekend is anything to go by, then you guys know how to do meetings.
All right. Okay, cool. That's good. Okay, so thank you so much for your time. You'll be sticking around for questions, and if people want to commit to things that have been said thus far on this panel, please fill it in the spreadsheet. And with that being said, thank you so much. Thanks a lot.